Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Marshall Gilmore had always believed in building things from the ground up. At 34, he transformed himself from a kid who grew up in Detroit's roughest neighborhood into a senior software architect with a reputation for solving impossible problems. His calloused hands, remnants of teenage summers working construction with his grandfather, now crafted elegant code that powered Fortune 500 companies. The downtown Chicago apartment he shared with his wife Ashley reflected his journey. Clean lines, minimal furniture, but every piece carefully chosen and built to last. Just like everything else in his life, Marshall approached it with methodical precision. "You're obsessing again," Ashley said from the kitchen island, not looking up from her tablet. At 29, she possessed the kind of effortless beauty that turned heads in restaurants. Blonde hair always perfectly styled, clothes that seemed to arrange themselves flatteringly around her petite frame. She worked as a marketing coordinator for a boutique firm, though Marshall had noticed she spent more time networking at industry events than at her desk. "I'm preparing," Marshall replied, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. Today was different. Today was North Technologies. For 3 years, Marshall had watched Grant North build his cybersecurity company from startup to industry leader. North Technologies didn't just offer jobs, they offered legacies. Their autonomous security systems protected critical infrastructure across the globe. Working there wasn't about a paycheck, it was about being part of something that mattered. "It's just another interview, Marsh," Ashley said, finally glancing up with those green eyes that had first caught his attention at a mutual friend's party 5 years ago. "Don't make it bigger than it is." Marshall studied her reflection in the mirror. They'd been married for 3 years, together for 5, and lately, he'd been noticing things. The way she deflected whenever he shared his ambitions. How she seemed more interested in her phone than his stories about breakthrough projects. The growing distance that felt like standing on opposite sides of a canyon. "This isn't just another interview, Ash. Grant North personally requested to meet with me. Do you know what that means?" She shrugged, returning to her tablet. Rich guys with God complexes love finding new people to worship them. The comment stung because it revealed how little she understood him. Marshall had never worshipped anyone. Respect was earned through competence and integrity. 2 qualities he'd recognized immediately in Grant North's public interviews and company culture. Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from his best friend and former college roommate, Craig Garrison. "Today's the day, brother. You got this. North would be an idiot not to hire you." Craig understood. As a project manager at a competing firm, he knew what North Technologies represented in their industry. He'd been the one to encourage Marshall to apply when the position first opened, spending hours helping him prepare. "I should get going," Marshall said, grabbing his portfolio from the coffee table. 3 years of his best work, organized and presented with the same meticulous attention to detail that had earned him recognition at his current job. Ashley looked up one final time. "What if you don't get it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marshall had asked himself the same thing, but hearing it from his wife felt different, like she expected him to fail. "Then I'll figure out the next step," he said simply. "But I'm not planning to fail." As he walked to the elevator, Marshall reflected on the path that brought him here. His grandfather, Emmanuel Gilmore, had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. Emmanuel had been a carpenter, a man who measured success in straight lines and solid foundations. "Build it right the first time, Marshall," he used to say. "Shortcuts are just long paths to failure." Marshall had applied that philosophy to everything: his education, his career, his marriage. He'd worked 2 jobs to pay for computer science school, spent countless nights learning new programming languages, built his reputation one successful project at a time. The drive to North Technologies headquarters gave him time to center himself. This interview wasn't about desperation or ambition for its own sake. It was about finding a place where his skills could make a real difference, where he could build something lasting. As Marshall pulled into the visitor parking space, he didn't notice the black sedan that had been following him since his apartment building. Inside, Ashley Gilmore sat behind the wheel, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the steering wheel as she watched her husband disappear into the glass building that represented everything she'd been working to prevent. Chapter 2: Hidden Motives. Ashley Gilmore waited in her car for 30 minutes after Marshall entered the North Technologies building before making her call. "Carmen, it's me," she said when the familiar voice answered. He just went in. Carmen Horton had been Ashley's sorority sister at Northwestern and now worked as a private investigator specializing in corporate background checks. Their friendship had always been transactional. Carmen provided information. Ashley provided access to social circles that valued her appearance and charm over substance. "You sure about this?" Carmen asked. "Marshall's a good guy. Maybe the best thing that ever happened to you." Ashley stared at the glass building where her husband was probably impressing another room full of men with his earnest competence. That's exactly the problem. She'd met Marshall at a party she'd attended with her then-boyfriend, a med school student whose family owned half of Lake Forest. Marshall had been Craig's plus one, quiet and intense in the corner, discussing something technical with animated gestures. He wasn't her type, too serious, too working class, too genuine. But her med school boyfriend had cheated on her that same week, and Marshall had been there with his steady presence and complete devotion. He pursued her with the same methodical determination he applied to everything else, and she found herself swept along by the novelty of being someone's entire world. The problem was that Marshall's world kept expanding. Every success at work, every recognition, every opportunity like North Technologies, they all pulled him further from the life Ashley had envisioned for them. "He's going to get this job," Ashley said into the phone. "Grant North doesn't meet with people unless he's already decided. So let him get it. North Technologies pays well. You could quit that marketing job you hate." Ashley closed her eyes. Carmen didn't understand. Nobody understood. If Marshall takes this job, he'll disappear completely. You know what these tech guys are like when they find their calling. He already works 12-hour days on regular projects. Imagine what he'd do at his dream company. "You married him knowing who he was, Ash." "I married him thinking he'd grow out of it." The admission felt ugly in the morning sunlight. "I thought he'd realize there was more to life than code and security protocols. That he'd want to travel, to live a little, to put our relationship first for once." Instead, Marshall had only grown more passionate about his work. Their conversations increasingly revolved around his projects, his goals, his 5-year plans that never seemed to include Ashley's dreams of a different life. "What exactly did you send them?" Carmen asked. Ashley reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope identical to the one she'd overnight to Grant North's office 3 days ago. Inside were photos from Marshall's college years, pictures of him at parties, drunk and laughing with friends, screenshots of old social media posts with crude jokes, a fabricated report suggesting he'd been involved in academic dishonesty. None of it was damning by itself, but together, the documents painted a picture of someone unreliable, immature, potentially dishonest. Carmen had helped her obtain Marshall's college records through questionable means, and Ashley had done the rest with photo manipulation software and carefully crafted narratives. "It's not even that bad," Ashley said, more to convince herself than Carmen. "It's just college stuff. Everyone has embarrassing photos. Everyone doesn't send their spouses embarrassing photos to potential employers. He'll find another job. Maybe something local, something with better work-life balance. This could actually be good for our marriage." Carmen was quiet for a long moment. "You know this is sabotage, right? Like, actual sabotage of your husband's career." Ashley ended the call without responding. She knew exactly what it was. Through the building's glass facade, she could see Marshall in the lobby, checking his watch and straightening his tie. He looked confident, prepared, optimistic. Everything she'd fallen for and everything she now resented. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How did Marshall's interview go? Your father and I are so excited for you both." Ashley's parents had loved Marshall from day one. Her father, a corporate lawyer who typically intimidated Ashley's boyfriends, had immediately respected Marshall's work ethic and integrity. Her mother had been charmed by his old-fashioned courtesy and obvious devotion to Ashley. They saw him as the stable, successful husband their daughter deserved. They didn't see what Ashley saw, a man so consumed by his professional identity that he'd already forgotten how to be a husband. As Ashley drove home, she tried to imagine the conversation Marshall would have with Grant North, the technical discussions that would go over her head, the shared vision for cybersecurity innovation that would light up Marshall's eyes the way she hadn't in months. She tried to feel guilty about the envelope now sitting in North's office, but mostly she felt relieved. For the first time in months, she was taking control of her own life instead of watching it disappear into her husband's ambitions. Ashley didn't know that Marshall had spent the previous evening writing her a letter he'd planned to give her after the interview. A letter explaining how the job at North Technologies would finally provide the security and stability he'd always wanted to build for them. How it would be the foundation for the family they'd talked about starting, the house they wanted to buy, the future they'd dreamed of together. The letter was in his portfolio, waiting for a celebration that would never come. Chapter 3. The Betrayal Unveiled. The North Technologies conference room overlooked Chicago's skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city Marshall had conquered through pure determination. Grant North, a silver-haired man in his 50s with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, sat across from him with Marshall's portfolio open between them. For 45 minutes, the interview had been everything Marshall had hoped. They discussed Marshall's innovative approach to penetration testing, his development of autonomous threat detection systems, his vision for the future of cybersecurity. Grant's questions were probing but appreciative, the kind of technical deep dive that energized Marshall rather than intimidated him. "Your work on the Henderson Bank project is remarkable," Grant said, reviewing Marshall's case studies. "You identified vulnerabilities that 3 separate security firms missed. Pattern recognition combined with social engineering awareness," Marshall replied. "Most hackers aren't just exploiting technical weaknesses, they're exploiting human psychology. Exactly the kind of thinking we need here." Grant closed the portfolio and leaned back in his chair. For a moment, Marshall thought he saw something change in the older man's expression, a shadow crossing his face. "Marshall, I have to be honest with you. This interview has gone better than I expected." Marshall felt his heart rate increase. "I'm glad to hear that, sir. Which makes what I have to discuss next all the more difficult." Grant opened a different folder, one Marshall hadn't noticed before. Inside were photographs, college photos Marshall recognized from his Facebook account years ago, screenshots of old posts, documents that looked official but felt wrong in ways Marshall couldn't immediately identify. "3 days ago, I received a package of materials regarding your background," Grant continued, his voice careful and professional. "I want to give you an opportunity to address these concerns directly." Marshall stared at the photos, his mind racing. There was nothing scandalous in his past, nothing that should disqualify him from any position. Yet seeing his college memories arranged like evidence in a criminal case made his stomach turn. "I don't understand," Marshall said, picking up one of the photos. It showed him at a party during senior year, clearly drunk, making an exaggerated face at the camera. Harmless college stupidity, but presented without context, it looked different. "Where did you get these?" "They were submitted anonymously, along with this report." Grant handed him a typed document that detailed alleged academic dishonesty, unprofessional behavior, and character concerns. Marshall's name was on it, but he'd never seen it before in his life. "This isn't real," Marshall said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "I mean, the photos are real, but this report, I've never seen this document. My academic record is clean. You can verify everything with Northwestern." Grant nodded slowly. "I already have. Your official transcripts show no academic violations. Your professors remember you as one of their most dedicated students." "Then why?" "Because someone wanted to make sure you didn't get this job." Grant's expression was grim. "Marshall, I've been in business for 20 years. I can recognize a smear campaign when I see one. The question is, who would go to this much trouble to sabotage your career?" Marshall's mind immediately went to competitors at his current job, former colleagues who might resent his success, industry rivals. The idea that someone would deliberately fabricate evidence to destroy his opportunities was staggering, but not impossible in the cutthroat world of corporate cybersecurity. "I honestly don't know," Marshall said, "but I can prove that document is fabricated. I can provide character references, work samples, anything you need." Grant was quiet for a long moment, studying Marshall's face. "Here's what I see," he said finally. "Either you're an excellent liar, or someone who cares about your personal life has decided to torpedo your professional one." Based on this interview, I'm inclined to believe the latter. What do you mean? The envelope was postmarked locally. Whoever sent this has access to your personal photos and enough information about your background to create convincing forgeries. This wasn't done by a business competitor, Marshall. This was done by someone close to you. The realization hit Marshall like a physical blow. The photos were from his private social media accounts. The personal details in the forged report were things only family or close friends would know. The timing, right before the most important interview of his career. I need to make some calls, Marshall said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I understand. Grant closed the folder and looked directly at Marshall. For what it's worth, I believe you. Your work speaks for itself, and this kind of sabotage tells me more about the person who sent it than about you. But I can't ignore it entirely. I need you to find out who did this and why. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Good. Take a week. Get to the bottom of this situation. If you can prove what I suspect, that someone in your personal life is actively sabotaging your career, then we'll move forward with an offer. But I won't hire someone whose family situation could compromise their professional effectiveness. Marshall stood and shook Grant's hand, his mind already racing through possibilities. Thank you for giving me a chance to fix this. Don't thank me yet. Proving betrayal by someone you trust, that's going to hurt more than losing any job. As Marshall walked to the elevator, Grant's words echoed in his mind. Someone close to him had done this. Someone who knew his dreams, his ambitions, his schedule. Someone who had access to his personal life and detailed knowledge of this interview. The elevator doors closed, and Marshall caught his reflection in the polished steel. For the first time in years, he didn't recognize the man looking back at him. The careful control he'd maintained his entire adult life was cracking, and underneath was something harder, more dangerous than he'd ever acknowledged. By the time he reached the parking garage, Marshall had made a decision. He was going to find out who had betrayed him, and he was going to make sure they never had the opportunity to do it again. His phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. How did it go? Can't wait to hear everything. Marshall stared at the message for a full minute before deleting it without responding. The woman who claimed to love him was asking about the interview she might have just destroyed. It was time to find out exactly who Ashley Gilmore really was. Chapter 4. The investigation begins. Marshall sat in his car in the North Technologies parking garage for 20 minutes, staring at his phone. Ashley's text glowed on the screen like an accusation. How did it go? Can't wait to hear everything. The timing was too perfect. The intimacy of the sabotage too complete. But Marshall's analytical mind demanded evidence before accusation. He'd built his career on facts, not assumptions. He drove to a coffee shop near his office instead of going home. The familiar environment of caffeine and keyboard clicks helped him think clearly. Marshall opened his laptop and began methodically examining the possibilities. First, he called his college roommate Craig. How'd it go, brother? Craig's voice was excited, expectant. Someone sent Grant North a file of compromising photos and fake documents to sabotage the interview, Marshall said without preamble. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. What? Who would do that? That's what I'm trying to figure out. The photos were from my private Facebook account, mostly college stuff. Did you ever save any of those old party pictures? Hell no. I barely remember half those parties, let alone save photos from them. Marsh, this is insane. Who has access to your social media? Marshall mentally cataloged the list. His wife, his mother-in-law, who was Facebook obsessed, a handful of college friends. His current colleagues weren't connected to his personal accounts. He kept strict boundaries between professional and private online presence. Craig, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Shoot, has Ashley ever said anything to you about my work? About me spending too much time on projects, or anything like that? Another pause. Marsh, you know I love Ashley, but yeah? Last month at Jake's birthday party, she mentioned that you've been obsessing over North Technologies. She said something about you caring more about Grant North's approval than your marriage. Marshall felt the pieces clicking into place, each revelation adding weight to a conclusion he didn't want to reach. What exactly did she say? She was drinking, probably didn't mean anything by it. But she said you'd been talking about North Technologies for months, that she felt like she was competing with your career for attention. She said, shit, I probably shouldn't repeat this. Tell me. She said she wished you cared half as much about your marriage as you did about impressing some CEO you'd never met. Marshall closed his laptop. The evidence was circumstantial but mounting. Access to photos, intimate knowledge of his ambitions, recent complaints about his priorities. But Ashley wasn't sophisticated enough to forge official documents. She would have needed help. His phone rang. "Ashley. Hey, you," she said, her voice bright with artificial cheer. "You never answered my text. How did it go?" "It was interesting," Marshall replied carefully. "Grant North is everything I thought he'd be." "That's great. So you got the job." Marshall noticed she asked about the outcome, not about his experience or what they discussed. "He needs to review a few things. I should know by next week." Oh, her disappointment sounded genuine, which was almost worse. "Well, I'm sure it'll work out. You want to go out to dinner tonight? Celebrate the interview at least." "Actually, I need to work late tonight. Finishing up a project." "Of course you do." The mask slipped for just a moment, irritation bleeding through her cheerful tone. "Marsh, when was the last time we had dinner together? Just us, no work talk, no phone calls." "We had dinner 2 nights ago. You had dinner while answering emails and explaining server architecture to me like I was your client instead of your wife." Marshall felt a familiar frustration. He'd been excited about a breakthrough on a particularly challenging security problem, and he'd wanted to share it with the person closest to him. Ashley had listened with the glazed expression she wore whenever he discussed work, then changed the subject to weekend plans. "I'll be home by 9, he said. "We can talk then." After ending the call, Marshall made another decision. He drove to Carmen Horton's office. He'd met Carmen several times at social gatherings with Ashley. She was a private investigator who specialized in corporate background checks, which made her exactly the kind of person who could fabricate convincing official documents. More importantly, she and Ashley had maintained their sorority friendship with the kind of intensity that suggested shared secrets. Carmen's office was in a downtown building that had seen better decades. Her name was painted on frosted glass in letters that might have been stylish in 1985. Marshall knocked and entered without waiting for permission. "Marshall Gilmore," Carmen said, looking up from her desk without surprise. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "Were you?" Marshall closed the door behind him and took the chair across from her desk. "And why's that?" Carmen was the kind of woman who cultivated toughness like armor, leather jacket, dark makeup, expression that suggested she'd seen everything humanity had to offer and wasn't impressed. But Marshall caught something in her eyes that looked like guilt. "Your wife called me this morning," Carmen said. "Said you had a rough interview. Asked if I knew anyone who could help with character references." Interesting timing. Marshall pulled out his phone and showed Carmen the photos Grant North had shared. "Someone sent these to North Technologies 3 days ago, along with fabricated academic records suggesting I was dishonest and unreliable." Carmen studied the images without touching the phone. "College photos. Looks like typical Friday night stupidity. The kind of photos someone could use to make me look unprofessional if they presented them without context. I suppose." "Carmen, I need to ask you directly. Did you help someone sabotage my interview?" She met his gaze steadily. "No." "Did Ashley ask you to help sabotage my interview?" The pause was fractional, but Marshall caught it. "No." "Then why do you look guilty?" Carmen leaned back in her chair, her tough facade cracking slightly. "Because I told her she was making a mistake." "What mistake?" "Marshall, I've known Ashley since college. She's my friend, but she's used to getting what she wants, and she doesn't always think through the consequences." "What did she want? For you to not get this job?" "She came to me last month asking about corporate background checks, how they work, what kinds of things disqualify candidates. She was worried that North Technologies would consume your life, that you'd disappear into your work completely." Marshall felt his world shifting, relationships he'd trusted revealing themselves as carefully constructed lies. "And you helped her?" "I told her it was insane, that she should talk to you about her concerns instead of sabotaging your career. I told her she was going to destroy her marriage. But you didn't stop her." Carmen's expression hardened. "I'm not Ashley's keeper, and I'm not yours either. But if you're here looking for someone to confirm that your wife betrayed you, then yeah, she did. And if you're looking for advice, here it is. Decide what you want to do about it before you go home tonight, because Ashley's going to lie to your face, and you're going to have to decide whether you can live with that." Marshall stood to leave, then turned back. "One more question. How would she have created fake academic records convincing enough to fool a CEO?" Carmen's smile was bitter. "She wouldn't have, but she knows someone who would." "Who?" Her ex-boyfriend from Northwestern, Felipe Burke. He works in academic administration now, has access to official letterhead, student records, all kinds of resources someone could use to create convincing forgeries. Marshall memorized the name. Felipe Burke. Another piece of the puzzle, another person in Ashley's life who'd been willing to betray a stranger to help her get what she wanted. As he walked back to his car, Marshall realized that discovering Ashley's betrayal wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning. Because now he knew exactly who his wife was, and she had no idea that he knew. That gave him all the advantage he needed. Chapter 5. The Deeper Truth. Marshall spent the next 3 days conducting the most thorough investigation of his life. Not of security vulnerabilities or system weaknesses, but of the woman he'd married. What he discovered made the North Technologies sabotage look like a minor character flaw. He started with Felipe Burke. Northwestern's academic administration office was housed in a Gothic revival building that made Marshall feel like he was infiltrating a medieval fortress. He'd called ahead, claiming to be verifying his own academic records for a security clearance update. A lie, but one that got him an appointment with Felipe without raising suspicions. Felipe Burke was exactly what Marshall had expected. Soft around the middle, prematurely thinning hair, the kind of man who'd peaked in college and spent his 30s reliving those glory days. His office was cluttered with Northwestern memorabilia and photos from what appeared to be the same fraternity parties where Marshall's compromising photos had been taken. Marshall Gilmore, Felipe said, consulting his computer screen. Class of 2013, Computer Science, graduated summa cum laude. Very impressive record. Thank you. I just need official copies of my transcripts for a background check. Of course. Though I have to say, your name sounds familiar. Didn't you marry Ashley Hahn? She was a year behind us. Kappa Sigma sorority? Marshall's blood chilled. Felipe wasn't just willing to help Ashley. He was personally invested. You know Ashley? We dated for a while junior and senior year. Great girl. Actually, she called me last week asking about transcript verification processes. Said you were applying for some big job and wanted to make sure everything looked perfect. The lies were getting more elaborate. Ashley hadn't just asked for help. She'd created an entire narrative to manipulate Felipe into providing assistance. What kind of assistance did she need? Marshall asked carefully. Felipe's expression shifted slightly, the first sign that he realized he might have said too much. Just general information. How the verification process works. What kinds of red flags employers look for. Nothing specific. Felipe, I need you to be honest with me. Did Ashley ask you to create false documents using Northwestern's letterhead? I don't know what you're talking about. Marshall pulled out his phone and showed Felipe the fabricated academic misconduct report that Grant North had received. This document claims to be from Northwestern's Academic Integrity Office. It's completely false. I was never investigated for academic dishonesty. But someone with access to official letterhead and intimate knowledge of university procedures created it. Felipe studied the document, his face growing pale. Marshall, Ashley said. What did Ashley say? She said you were worried about some college stuff coming up in a background check, that you wanted to get ahead of it by explaining context. She asked me to help draft a letter explaining that certain incidents had been investigated and resolved. What incidents? I never had any incidents. The party photos, the social media posts. Ashley said you were concerned that a potential employer might misinterpret them, and you wanted an official explanation that you'd been a good student despite normal college behavior. Marshall felt sick. Ashley had manipulated Felipe by telling him a version of the truth twisted just enough to make him complicit. She'd made him believe he was helping Marshall while actually destroying his career prospects. Felipe, this document doesn't explain away college behavior. It creates the impression that I was investigated for serious academic violations. It's designed to make any employer question my integrity. The blood drained from Felipe's face as he understood what he'd been manipulated into doing. Oh God, Ashley said. She said you just wanted something official looking to include with your application materials, to get ahead of any concerns about the photos. She lied to you, just like she lied to me. Felipe sat heavily in his chair, running his hands through his thinning hair. Marshall, I'm so sorry. I thought I was helping. Ashley can be very convincing when she wants something. How convincing? Felipe looked up sharply, recognizing something dangerous in Marshall's tone. What do you mean? How far back does this go? How long has Ashley been manipulating people to get what she wants? Felipe was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke. She cheated on me. Senior year, right before graduation. I found out she'd been seeing someone else for months, some medical student from a wealthy family. When I confronted her, she convinced me that it was my fault for not being ambitious enough, for not giving her the kind of life she deserved. But you still helped her sabotage my career. She called in tears, said you were obsessed with work, that this job would destroy your marriage. She made it sound like she was trying to save your relationship. Marshall stood to leave, his mind already processing this new information. Ashley's betrayal wasn't impulsive, it was part of a pattern. She'd been manipulating the people around her for years, using their emotions and loyalties as weapons to get what she wanted. Felipe, I need you to write down exactly what Ashley asked you to do, word for word. Include dates and times. Can you do that? Are you going to report me? Not if you help me fix this. That evening, Marshall returned home to find Ashley cooking dinner, a rare occurrence that immediately raised his suspicions. She was wearing the black dress he'd bought her for their anniversary, her hair styled the way he'd once told her he loved. Hey you, she said, kissing him on the cheek with practiced affection. I made your favorite. Chicken marsala, a dish she'd only prepared twice in their 3-year marriage, both times when she wanted something. Marshall sat at the table and watched her performance, noting the calculated nature of every gesture. How was your day, he asked. Good. Busy. Carmen called. She said you stopped by her office? I didn't even know you knew where she worked. Ashley's voice was light, conversational, but Marshall caught the tension underneath. She was fishing for information, trying to understand what he knew. I wanted to get her perspective on background checks, Marshall said, since someone's been investigating me. Oh right, that thing Grant North mentioned. Any idea who might have sent those documents? Marshall studied his wife's face as she asked the question. Her expression was perfectly concerned, appropriately curious. If he hadn't already known the truth, he would have believed her completely. Actually, yes. I found out exactly who sent them. Ashley went very still, though she tried to hide it by taking a sip of wine. Really? Who would do something like that? My wife. The words hung in the air between them like a blade. Ashley's carefully constructed mask didn't slip. She was too good at this game for such an obvious tell. Instead, she laughed, the sound bright and incredulous. Marshall, that's crazy. Why would I sabotage your career? I want you to succeed. Do you? Because Felipe Burke told me exactly how you convinced him to create fake academic records. And Carmen confirmed that you've been planning this for weeks. Ashley set down her wine glass with steady hands, but Marshall caught the slight tremor in her fingers. I don't know what they told you, but they told me the truth. The question is, what are you going to tell me? For the first time in their marriage, Marshall saw Ashley's mask slip completely. The concerned wife, the supportive partner, the woman who claimed to love him. All of it fell away, revealing someone cold and calculating underneath. Fine, she said, her voice losing all warmth. You want the truth? I did it. I sent those documents to Grant North because I knew that job would be the end of us. So you decided to destroy my career instead. I decided to save our marriage. Marshall felt something break inside him, not his heart, but something deeper. The fundamental trust that had allowed him to build a life with another person. Our marriage was never in danger, Ashley. But it is now. Ashley stood up from the table, her posture shifting into something more aggressive. You have no idea what it's like being married to someone who cares more about their work than their spouse. You live for those projects, Marshall. You come alive when you talk about security protocols and threat assessments, but you look bored when I try to talk about my day. Because your day consists of shopping and gossip and avoiding any real responsibility. There it is. Ashley's smile was sharp, triumphant. Finally, some honesty. You think I'm shallow. You think my work doesn't matter. You think I'm just some accessory to your perfect professional life. I think you're someone who destroys other people's dreams when they interfere with what you want. And I think you're someone who forgot he had a wife the moment you decided to become the next great cybersecurity genius. Marshall looked at the woman he'd married. Really looked at her, maybe for the first time. Beautiful, charming, skilled at reading people and giving them exactly what they wanted. But underneath all of that, someone capable of breathtaking betrayal without a trace of genuine remorse. Pack a bag, he said quietly. What? Pack a bag and stay somewhere else tonight. I need time to think. Marshall, we can work through this. Couples therapy, communication exercises, whatever you want. I know I made a mistake, but you didn't make a mistake, Ashley. You made a choice. You chose to betray me, and now I'm choosing how to respond. Ashley stared at him for a long moment, and Marshall saw her calculating whether tears or anger would be more effective. Finally, she chose defiance. Fine, but when you realize that job would have destroyed us anyway, don't come crying to me. As Marshall watched his wife pack her things, he realized that Ashley had given him an unexpected gift. She'd shown him exactly who she was, and now he was free to show her who he could become. Chapter 6. The plan takes shape. Marshall spent his first night alone in 3 years methodically documenting everything he'd discovered about Ashley's betrayal. By dawn, he had a comprehensive file that included Felipe Burke's written confession, Carmen Horton's reluctant testimony, and a detailed timeline of Ashley's deception. But evidence of her betrayal wasn't enough. Marshall wanted justice, and he wanted it to be thorough. He called Grant North at 7 a.m. Marshall, Grant's voice was crisp, professional. I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. I found out who sabotaged the interview. It was my wife. The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Your wife? Christ, Marshall, I'm sorry. That's not something I've encountered before. I have proof. Written confessions from the people she manipulated, documentation of how she orchestrated the whole thing. I can have everything to you by this afternoon. Send me what you have. But Marshall, I need to ask, what's your situation now? Domestically? She's moved out temporarily. I'm considering divorce proceedings. Good. I know that sounds cold, but a spouse actively sabotaging your career isn't just a personal problem. It's a security risk. If I hire you and she decides to target North Technologies directly, that becomes my problem too. Grant was right, though Marshall hadn't considered the broader implications. Ashley knew his work methods, his security protocols, his professional connections. In the wrong hands, that information could be weaponized. I understand. Give me a week to resolve this completely. How completely? Marshall paused, choosing his words carefully. Completely enough that she'll never be in a position to interfere with anyone's career again. After ending the call, Marshall made a list of everyone who'd been complicit in Ashley's deception. Felipe Burke, who'd created false documents. Carmen Horton, who'd provided guidance while claiming neutrality. And Ashley herself, who'd orchestrated everything. But as Marshall considered his options for revenge, he realized that simply exposing Ashley's betrayal wouldn't be sufficient. She'd shown him that she was willing to destroy other people to get what she wanted. That kind of person didn't learn from consequences, they just got better at avoiding them. Marshall needed to ensure that Ashley faced consequences that would fundamentally change her ability to manipulate others. He started by calling his lawyer, Scott Paul, a sharp-eyed family attorney who'd handled Marshall's real estate purchases and business contracts. Scott had always struck Marshall as the kind of lawyer who enjoyed complicated problems. Marshall, good to hear from you. What can I do for you? I need to discuss divorce proceedings. But it's complicated. They always are. How complicated? Marshall explained Ashley's sabotage in clinical detail, providing times, dates, and evidence. Scott listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. This is career sabotage, Scott said when Marshall finished. Potentially prosecutable as interference with business relations, depending on how aggressive we want to get. But from a divorce perspective, it's also evidence of marital misconduct that could affect asset distribution. What do you mean? Illinois is a no-fault divorce state, but marital misconduct can still influence property division if it relates to the dissolution of the marriage or dissipation of marital assets. Ashley's sabotage directly undermines your earning capacity, which affects the marital estate. Marshall hadn't considered the financial implications. The North Technologies position would have nearly doubled his salary. Ashley's betrayal hadn't just cost him a job. It had cost him years of potential earnings. I want to file for divorce immediately, Marshall said. But I also want to file a civil suit for intentional interference with business relations. That's aggressive and expensive. I have evidence, and I want to make sure this never happens again, to me or to anyone else. Scott was quiet for a moment. Marshall, I need to ask, are you looking for justice, or are you looking for revenge? What's the difference? Justice is proportionate. Revenge is comprehensive. Marshall thought about Ashley's cold smile when she'd finally admitted to sabotaging his career. The way she tried to manipulate him even after being caught. The years of subtle undermining he was only now beginning to recognize. Both, he said finally. In that case, I have some ideas. But first, I need you to do something for me. What? Go home and make sure Ashley hasn't taken anything that doesn't belong to her. Document everything. Take photos. I have a feeling this is going to get complicated. Marshall returned to his apartment to find that Ashley had been thorough in her temporary departure. She'd taken clothes, jewelry, personal items, and several things that definitely didn't belong to her. His laptop was gone, along with external hard drives containing years of work projects. Bank statements, tax documents, and financial records had been cleaned out of his home office. She'd also taken his grandfather's watch, a vintage Omega that Emmanuel Gilmore had given Marshall on his 18th birthday. Marshall photographed everything, cataloging each missing item with the methodical precision he'd learned from crime scene analysis. By the time he finished, he had evidence of theft to add to the interference charges. But as he worked, Marshall realized that Ashley had made a critical error. She'd taken his work laptop, which meant she now possessed proprietary information belonging to his current employer. That wasn't just theft, it was corporate espionage. Marshall called his boss at his current cybersecurity firm. Rich, it's Marshall. I need to report a security breach. Rich Dillon had been Marshall's supervisor for 2 years, and he understood the implications immediately. What kind of breach? Personal. My wife has taken my work laptop and external drives containing client data. I need to report it officially and discuss security protocols. Jesus, Marshall. How much data are we talking about? 3 years of penetration testing reports, client system analyses, and security protocols for approximately 40 companies. The silence on the other end was ominous. Rich was calculating the potential liability, the damage to client relationships, the regulatory implications. We need to meet immediately. And Marshall? This changes your situation significantly. If your wife is attempting to leverage proprietary client data, we're talking about federal crimes. As Marshall drove to his office, he realized that Ashley had just escalated their conflict beyond personal revenge into something much more serious. She'd gone from sabotaging his career to committing federal crimes. And unlike Ashley, Marshall knew exactly how to document, investigate, and prosecute federal crimes. By the end of the week, Ashley would discover that destroying Marshall's dream job had been the biggest mistake of her life. Chapter 7. The Net Closes. Ashley felt confident as she sat in the downtown coffee shop waiting for her meeting with Jake Small, a technology reporter from the Chicago Tribune. She'd spent 3 days crafting the perfect narrative, a story about corporate corruption and abuse of power that would make Marshall look like a victim while positioning her as the brave whistleblower. The stolen laptop and hard drives were in her oversized purse, containing what she believed was her insurance policy. If Marshall wanted to play hardball with divorce proceedings, she'd show him what real hardball looked like. Ashley Gilmore. Jake was younger than she'd expected, probably fresh out of journalism school, with the eager expression of someone hungry for his first big story. "Thank you for meeting with me," Ashley said, settling into her carefully chosen persona of reluctant informant. "What I'm about to share could be dangerous for me personally, but I think the public has a right to know." Jake pulled out a digital recorder and notebook, his eyes bright with anticipation. "Take me through it from the beginning." Ashley had rehearsed this story for hours. She painted Marshall as an obsessive cybersecurity specialist who'd been using his position to access confidential client information for personal gain. She claimed he'd been planning to sell proprietary security data to competitors, and that she'd only discovered his scheme when he became desperate to land the North Technologies job. He was stealing from his own clients, Ashley said, allowing her voice to tremble with the right amount of emotion. When I confronted him about it, he became violent. I was afraid for my safety, so I took evidence of his crimes and left. "What kind of evidence?" Jake asked, leaning forward. Ashley patted her purse. "Client files, security assessments, proprietary algorithms. Everything needed to prove that he's been running a corporate espionage operation." Jake's pen moved rapidly across his notebook. "Have you taken this to the police?" "I'm afraid to. My husband has connections in law enforcement through his security work. I think they might cover for him." It was a beautiful story, Ashley thought. It cast her as the victim while making Marshall look like both a criminal and a threat. Even if the allegations didn't stick, The mere publication of such accusations would destroy his reputation permanently. Ms. Gilmore, I need to verify some of these claims before publication. Can you provide me with copies of the documents you mentioned? Of course. Ashley reached into her purse, then froze. Standing across the coffee shop, watching her through the window, was Marshall. He wasn't alone. Two men in dark suits flanked him, FBI agents, based on their posture and professional alertness. Ashley's blood turned to ice as she realized what was happening. Marshall had somehow anticipated her plan and turned it against her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marshall. Check your email. Now, with trembling fingers, Ashley opened her email to find a message with multiple attachments. The subject line read, Evidence Package, Ashley Hahn Gilmore. The attachments included Felipe Burke's written confession detailing how Ashley had manipulated him into creating false documents. Carmen Horton's statement about Ashley's premeditated sabotage. Bank records showing Ashley had accessed Marshall's accounts to fund her schemes. Security footage from Northwestern's administration building showing Ashley meeting with Felipe. But the final attachment was the most damaging. A complete digital forensics report of Marshall's stolen laptop, showing that Ashley had attempted to copy sensitive client files and had researched the market value of proprietary security algorithms. The email concluded with a simple message, turn around. Ashley looked up to see Marshall entering the coffee shop with his FBI escorts. Jake Small had disappeared, apparently recognizing law enforcement when he saw it. Ashley Hahn Gilmore, one of the FBI agents, said, approaching her table. You're under arrest for theft of proprietary information, corporate espionage, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. This is insane, Ashley said, but her voice lacked conviction. I was trying to expose crimes, not commit them. Ma'am, you're in possession of stolen corporate data belonging to multiple companies. Your digital footprint shows you attempted to access and copy sensitive client files. That constitutes federal crimes regardless of your stated intentions. As the agent read Ashley her rights, Marshall approached her table. He looked different, harder, more focused, completely in control of the situation. You made two critical mistakes, Marshall said quietly. First, you underestimated how thoroughly I document everything. Second, you assumed I wouldn't be willing to destroy you as completely as you tried to destroy me. Marshall, please. We can work this out. I'll give everything back. I'll admit I made a mistake. It's too late for that. You crossed a line when you stole proprietary client data that endangered innocent companies and their employees. This isn't about our marriage anymore. It's about national security. The FBI agents escorted Ashley out of the coffee shop in handcuffs. As they passed the window, Marshall saw her looking back at him with an expression of absolute shock. She'd finally encountered someone who played the manipulation game better than she did. Marshall's phone buzzed with a call from Scott Paul. It's done, Marshall said, answering. Good. The divorce papers were served an hour ago. Given the federal charges, I don't anticipate much resistance on asset division. How do you feel? Marshall watched the FBI car disappear into Chicago traffic, carrying away the woman who'd nearly destroyed his career and had instead destroyed her own life. Like I can finally move forward. As Marshall walked back to his office, he thought about his grandfather's advice. Build it right the first time. Marshall had built his career right, his reputation right, his evidence right. Ashley had built her schemes on lies and manipulation, and they'd collapsed the moment they encountered someone who built things to last. Grant North called as Marshall reached his building. I saw the news about your wife's arrest. Federal charges, corporate espionage, and theft of proprietary information. She tried to sell client data to competitors. Christ. Marshall, I'm sorry you had to go through this, but I'm impressed with how you handled it. Most people would have let emotion cloud their judgment. I learned a long time ago that emotion without strategy is just noise. Well, your strategy was flawless. The job offer stands, assuming you're ready to start fresh. Marshall looked up at the sky, clear and blue above the Chicago skyline. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe freely. When do I start? Chapter 8, New Foundations. 3 months later, Marshall stood in Grant North's office, reviewing the quarterly security assessment for their largest client. The work was everything he'd hoped it would be, complex, meaningful, and surrounded by colleagues who shared his passion for excellence. Outstanding work on the Henderson Industries project, Grant said, closing the report Marshall had submitted. You've identified vulnerabilities that could have cost them millions. Thank you, sir. The team made it possible. The team executed your vision. There's a difference. Marshall had thrown himself into his new role with characteristic intensity, but this time it felt different. At his previous job, he'd been talented but constrained by corporate politics and limited resources. At North Technologies, he was free to pursue innovative solutions with the full support of leadership. His phone buzzed with a text from Craig. Dinner tonight? There's someone I want you to meet. Marshall smiled. Craig had been trying to set him up on dates since Ashley's arrest, convinced that Marshall needed to get back out there. Marshall appreciated the concern, but he wasn't ready for another relationship. He was still learning to trust his own judgment about people. Actually, there's something else I wanted to discuss, Grant continued. I've been thinking about expansion. Opening a West Coast office, maybe bringing in some government contracts. I'd want you to head up the new division. The offer was exactly the kind of opportunity Marshall had dreamed about. More responsibility, cutting-edge projects, the chance to build something from the ground up. 6 months ago, he would have accepted immediately. That's an incredible opportunity, Marshall said. Can I think about it? Grant raised an eyebrow. The old Marshall Gilmore would have said yes before I finished the sentence. The old Marshall Gilmore made some assumptions about what other people wanted that turned out to be catastrophically wrong. Fair point. Take your time. But Marshall, don't let Ashley's betrayal make you afraid of taking risks. She was the risk. The work is just the work. That evening, Marshall met Craig at their usual restaurant, a small Italian place near Marshall's apartment. Craig was already seated at their regular table, and he wasn't alone. Marshall, I want you to meet Dawn Bennett, Craig said, standing as Marshall approached. Dawn, this is the friend I've been telling you about. Dawn Bennett was nothing like Ashley. Where Ashley had been carefully polished and conventionally beautiful, Dawn was natural and understated. She wore minimal makeup, her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she was dressed in jeans and a sweater that suggested she valued comfort over impression. Craig's told me a lot about you, Dawn said, shaking Marshall's hand with a firm grip. He says you're the best cybersecurity specialist in Chicago. Craig exaggerates, but I'm good at my job. He also says you recently went through a difficult divorce. Marshall glanced at Craig, who shrugged apologetically. I believe in full disclosure, Craig said. I appreciate honesty, Marshall replied, sitting down across from Dawn. It's been in short supply in my life lately. Dawn smiled. Craig mentioned that too. He said your ex-wife tried to sabotage your career. She succeeded, temporarily, but it worked out better than the alternative. How so? Marshall considered how to explain the past few months without sounding bitter or angry. I learned some important things about myself. About what I want from relationships, about how I evaluate people, about the difference between someone supporting your dreams and someone tolerating them. That's a valuable education, even if it was expensive. Marshall found himself studying Dawn's face as she spoke. She had the kind of direct gaze that suggested she wasn't performing or calculating. She was just present, engaged, genuinely curious about his answer. What about you? Marshall asked. What do you do? I'm a trauma surgeon at Northwestern Memorial, so I have some experience with high-stress situations and complicated people. Craig grinned. Dawn's being modest. She's one of the youngest department heads in the hospital's history. Craig's being dramatic, Dawn replied. I just work hard and try not to let ego interfere with patient care. Marshall felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Genuine interest in getting to know someone better. Not because they were attractive or charming, but because they seemed like the kind of person who understood the value of competence and integrity. What kind of trauma surgery? Marshall asked. Emergency cases, mostly. Car accidents, workplace injuries, violence-related trauma. People at their worst moments, needing someone to help them survive long enough to get better. That must be incredibly demanding. It is. But it's also incredibly rewarding when you can save someone who might not have made it otherwise. Marshall noticed that Dawn talked about her work the way he talked about his, with passionate engagement rather than obligatory professionalism. She cared about what she did, not just how it looked to other people. How long have you been in trauma surgery? Marshall asked. 8 years. I did my residency here, then stayed on staff. Chicago is a good city for trauma surgery, unfortunately. Dawn grew up here too, Craig added. South Side. Worked her way through college and medical school. Marshall caught the subtext in Craig's comment. Dawn had built her career through merit and determination, not connections or advantages. She understood what it meant to earn success rather than expect it. As dinner progressed, Marshall found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. Dawn was intelligent without being competitive, successful without being arrogant, engaging without performing. She asked thoughtful questions about his work and shared stories from the hospital that revealed both her competence and her humanity. "I should probably mention," Dawn said as they finished dessert, "Craig told me about your situation with your ex-wife. The sabotage, the arrest, all of it." Marshall tensed slightly. And I think you handled it exactly right. Someone betrays your trust that completely. You document everything and let the legal system sort it out. No drama, no revenge fantasy, just consequences. Some people think I was too harsh. Some people have never had their career sabotaged by someone who claimed to love them, Dawn replied. You protected yourself and made sure she couldn't do the same thing to someone else. That's not harsh, that's responsible. Marshall felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he'd been carrying for months. Dawn understood not just what Ashley had done, but why Marshall's response had been necessary. Would you like to have coffee sometime? Marshall asked, surprising himself with the spontaneity of the question. Dawn smiled. I'd like that. But I should warn you. I work weird hours. I'm terrible at returning texts promptly, and I have strong opinions about almost everything. I work long hours. I overthink most decisions, and I've recently learned that my judgment about people needs some calibration. Sounds like we're both honest about our limitations. It's a start. As Marshall walked home that night, he thought about Grant's job offer and Dawn's direct way of engaging with the world. For the first time since Ashley's betrayal, he felt like he could see a future that was built on solid foundations rather than assumptions and hope. He pulled out his phone and sent Grant a text. I'd like to discuss the West Coast position. When can we talk? Then he sent another text to Dawn. Thank you for dinner. How's Saturday afternoon for coffee? The responses came quickly. Grant wrote back, my office, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Dawn replied, Saturday works. I know a place that makes excellent coffee and doesn't play music loud enough to drown out conversation. Marshall smiled as he climbed the stairs to his apartment. He was finally ready to start building again. Chapter 9. Earned Victory. 1 year later, Marshall stood on the roof deck of North Technology's new San Francisco office, watching the sunset paint the bay in shades of gold and crimson. The view was spectacular, but what satisfied him more was the knowledge that he'd earned every moment of it. The West Coast division had exceeded all projections in its first year of operation. Marshall's team had secured contracts with 3 major tech companies, developed innovative security protocols that were setting industry standards, and established North Technologies as a premier cybersecurity firm on both coasts. The quarterly reports look incredible, Grant said, joining Marshall at the railing. Client satisfaction scores are the highest we've ever recorded. The team makes it possible, Marshall replied, though he felt a quiet pride in what they'd accomplished together. Marshall, I've been in business for 25 years, and I've never seen someone build a division this successfully this quickly. You've earned something I don't give out lightly. Grant handed Marshall an envelope. Inside was a contract amendment making Marshall a partner in North Technologies, along with an equity stake that would set him up financially for the rest of his life. Partnership, Marshall said, reading the terms. Grant, this is extraordinary. You've earned extraordinary results. But more than that, you've shown the kind of character I want associated with this company permanently. The way you handled your personal situation last year, that showed me everything I needed to know about your integrity. Marshall thought about Ashley, now serving an 18-month federal sentence for corporate espionage. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, with Ashley receiving minimal assets due to her criminal conviction and the prenuptial agreement she'd forgotten she'd signed. She'd written him several letters from prison, alternately apologetic and accusatory, but Marshall had returned them unopened. Some chapters of life needed to stay closed. There's something else, Grant continued. I've been approached by the Department of Homeland Security about a cybersecurity initiative. They want North Technologies to lead a task force on critical infrastructure protection. It would be a 5-year contract, significant government work. That's incredible. What would you need from me? I need you to head the entire operation. Move back to Chicago, recruit the best people in the industry, build something that could protect the country's most vital systems. Marshall felt the familiar thrill of a meaningful challenge, but this time he also considered the personal implications. Moving back to Chicago would mean being closer to the life he'd built there, to the people who mattered to him. "I'd want Dawn to be part of the decision," Marshall said. Grant smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Bring her out here next week. Let her see what we're building, what this could mean for both of you." Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from Dawn. "Surgery went well. Patient stable. How's the sunset?" He replied with a photo of the San Francisco skyline and the message, "Beautiful, but not as good as Chicago sunsets." Dawn's response was immediate. "Smooth talker. See you tomorrow night." Marshall was flying back to Chicago the next morning for what had become a monthly ritual. Dinner with Dawn, coffee with Craig, a quiet weekend reconnecting with the city and people he cared about. The relationship with Dawn had developed slowly, carefully, built on mutual respect rather than passion or convenience. She understood his work demands because hers were equally intense. She appreciated his methodical approach to problems because she'd seen how lives could be saved or lost based on careful preparation and sound judgment. More importantly, Dawn had helped Marshall learn to trust his instincts about people again. She'd been patient while he worked through the lingering effects of Ashley's betrayal, and she'd celebrated his successes without trying to claim credit for them. "Are you happy?" Grant asked, watching Marshall text with Dawn. "Yes," Marshall said, realizing it was the first time in years he could answer that question without qualification. "I'm building something worth building with people who deserve my best work. That's all any of us can ask for." As Marshall prepared to leave the office, his phone rang with a call from Felipe Burke. "Marshall, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Northwestern's alumni directory." "Felipe, how are you?" "Better. I wanted to thank you for not pressing charges last year. I know you could have destroyed my career, and you chose not to." After Ashley's arrest, Marshall had decided that Felipe's punishment, losing his position at Northwestern and struggling to find work in academic administration, was sufficient consequence for his role in the sabotage. Unlike Ashley, Felipe had been manipulated rather than malicious. "You were honest about what happened," Marshall said. "That mattered. I've been thinking about what Ashley did to both of us, how she used our feelings against us. I wanted to ask, how did you get past the anger?" Marshall considered the question carefully. "I realized that staying angry was just another way of letting her control my life. The best revenge was building something better than what she tried to destroy." "Have you built something better?" Marshall looked around his office, thought about the team he'd assembled, the meaningful work they were doing, the relationship with Dawn that was based on honesty and mutual respect rather than manipulation and need. "Yes," he said, "I have." After ending the call, Marshall packed up his files and prepared for the flight home. In his briefcase was the partnership contract that represented everything he'd worked toward professionally. In his phone were text messages from a woman who supported his ambitions while pursuing her own with equal dedication. But what satisfied him most was the knowledge that he'd faced betrayal without becoming bitter, injustice without compromising his principles, and loss without losing sight of what mattered most. As the plane lifted off from San Francisco, Marshall thought about his grandfather's advice: build it right the first time. He'd finally learned to apply that wisdom not just to his career, but to every aspect of his life. He was building it right this time, and it was going to last. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.